Psalm 46 says, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam, let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. A river brings joy to the city of our God, the sacred home of the Most High. God dwells in that city, and it cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. The nations are in chaos, and their kingdoms crumble. God's voice thunders, and the earth melts. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Come and see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction upon the world. He causes wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress.
Now, if you guys would join me in prayer, I'd love to say a prayer for your family. Father, thank you for our families, and thank you for each mother here today on this Mother's Day. And thank you for our church family. They help us to actually feel your love here in a real, tangible way. And God, I pray today for everybody here who is in transition, and just steady them with the peace that can only be found through Jesus Christ. In your name we pray. Amen.
Before you guys sit down, I want to ask you to come over here for just a moment. I want to introduce this couple to you. This is Matt and Elisa Tracy, and before I mention them, I just want to say, statistics and surveys show that there are over 50,000 people in our county within a 20-mile radius who are not in church. They may be in Mother's Day, but most of the time they just have not been connected to church. And so one of the questions that I just keep in the front of my heart is, in 10 years from now, if some of your kids, grandkids, if they're going to be in church, what do we need to do now to help make those connections? That number is going to grow if we're not intentional. So part of that for me, and a huge part of that, is just helping to continue to develop leaders and pastors and places where, when we're ready to plant a first or second church, there are people who are ready from our congregation to lead that. So you may have known Aaron Christenberry and Carissa Christenberry have been on staff for a year doing a residency. He's finishing up that year residency in youth ministry under Pastor Anthony. And he'll be moving to Georgia in a couple weeks, and we'll have a celebration for him in 2 weeks to say goodbye to them. And you might also know Josh Warren. He just started a summer internship here to develop in some ministry skills. And Matt has just begun a 2-year residency in youth ministry under Pastor Anthony as well. So there's a month overlap with Aaron and Matt. And his wife, Elisa, actually, they both have a real heart and calling to youth ministry. So I am thrilled that they're joining the team this month, and you'll see them around. Some of you already know them from Fuel, but I just wanted to introduce them to you, and so you get a chance to welcome them. Thank you, guys. If you're the cooking type, I'm not. But if you are the cooking type, you know the delicate nature of making a meal and the timing of serving that meal perfectly. There's a lot of prep that goes into getting it right, especially if you have a high standard for that. You can't take something out of the oven too soon, or that something will just be uncooked or undercooked and it will be a disaster. You can't leave a cooked meal sitting around too long, or it'll cool down and it won't taste right, or something will kind of harden and gel and it won't be just the way you wanted it. If you bring a frozen dessert or a cold dish that's supposed to be cold and you leave it sitting around too long, or people are chatty and they don't eat it in time, it starts to melt and it doesn't taste right. If you leave meat or other things that can't sit out in the hot sun too long, those will spoil and then the whole meal will be ruined. There's just a delicate issue of timing and getting things right in the recipe. And it doesn't last very long. It's like a brief window of time. You know what I mean? Have you ever had one of those family disasters where you really put your heart into something and then it was ruined by one of those timing factors? And even if you get it all right and you spend all the time buying the groceries, preparing the recipe, putting the meal together, serving it, and it's perfect, then do you ever feel like, oh gee, that went really quick? They're going to be hungry again in 5 hours. For all the time it takes to get it there, it's just gone. Sometimes families have that delicate dynamic to where you want and you have in your mind this recipe of how family life could be, and if we could get it here and hold it here, this would just be a great time to cherish, to just keep it right here. But as quick as those moments come and as fleeting as they are, they're almost impossible to hold on to. If you think about life, especially within your family dynamic, it's almost a constant series of transitions. Someone described it as transitions are moments between transitions. From the minute you're born, you leave a very comfortable home where you really don't have any responsibilities, and now you're independent of your mom. Maybe some of you have, when you were a child, you've moved houses, and maybe even with that, moved schools. And that's pretty disruptive to a kid, no matter what your age in school, when you have to make all of those changes. Sometimes you don't even want to do it, but you don't have a choice. And then, hopefully, at some point, you graduate high school. That school totally becomes a memory to you. You don't even get to see those friends on a daily basis. That's a pretty major transition. And the transition for some to then move out of the house, start your own mortgage or rental payment, or start your own job, going into the workforce or moving away to college, those are major life transitions where most of your familiar surroundings change. Then there's some other big transitions that happen in life, and you can see them coming. For a lot of them, you can see them coming, but they're still really hard when you get there. The empty nest. Getting married. Giving away a child to be married. Losing a loved one. Losing your spouse. Getting hit with a divorce. Going into a facility that now cares for you instead of caring for yourself. Heraclitus said the only thing constant in life is change. I don't really agree with him, but sometimes in those seasons it feels like it, doesn't it? There's transitions, they just don't stop. When I was younger, I told you before, my parents were traveling musicians, singer-songwriters, and they wrote a song when my sister and I were little. They wrote a song called Freeze Time, and the opening line went, "The kids are tucked in, it's late at night, all is peaceful in our lives, little toys stacked in their room, I hear a voice say, I love you, if I could just freeze time." Do you ever have those moments? We could take this perfect dish and just put it in the freezer and then pull it out anytime we want. But the transitions come whether we like them or not. On the Holmes Stress Indicator, you might have seen these before, it's a list of the most stressful change events that could happen in the average person's life. Have you seen this? And they get a ranking of points up to 100 points. The top 12 most stressful events in the average person's life are related to family dynamic changes. The most stressful event, as they consider it, is the death of a spouse, followed by a divorce, followed by marital separation. Some of the other top ones are death of a close family member, a marriage. Even good stress can be incredibly stressful. Marital reconnection or reconciliation, a retirement, change in the health of a family member, or a pregnancy. Again, sometimes even the good changes bring a lot of stress and uncertainty into the family dynamic. It's a sense of mixed emotions. You go into these transitions and you can see some of this stuff has to happen. It's good stuff, like the unknown author that said, if there were no changes, there would be no butterflies. You know good stuff has to happen through these changes, but there's still a sense of loss. There's still a sense of, I don't like change. And when it comes to family stuff, it's even more pronounced in our soul because family's our closest web of connection. Yeah, there could be changes at work, but you could probably get another job. There could be changes at school, but you're not going to be there forever. When it comes to the family, this is our tight-knit group. People even say things like this: family will outlast all your friends. Or when you're in trouble, you go home. And when our family, our closest network changes, in those moments of transition, how we navigate those transitions will have an inordinate effect on our family culture. Today I want to look at 2 psalms and pull out 2 ingredients, one from each of those psalms, that will help us navigate family transitions. Whether it's a good and expected one or whether it's one that just blasted you from the side. These 2 ways of thinking. And remember in this series, as we've been talking about the family, I'm not trying to give comprehensive instructions on parenting or marriage. We're pulling out 2 biblical ways of thinking that if we can get these thoughts into our mind and let them just seep down into our heart, it will begin to be like yeast in the dough of our family. It will start to change things. So that's my prayer this morning. I pray that these 2 ingredients become ways of thinking throughout your heart and mind in your family, and that they would bring a change. The challenge will not be for you to do something. The challenge will be for you to change and orient your heart in a way to receive God's grace in these 2 things. So I'm going to read first from Psalm 46. This is the psalm you just heard read. This psalm and the 2 after it are basically among the same theme. There's a little cluster here of psalms that talks about absolute confidence in God's strength and security amidst a changing world. Sounds like it's helpful already, doesn't it? Rock solid confidence in God regardless of the chaos that is happening around us. So as we read this psalm, I want to talk about it with you and just pull out one ingredient. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. There's a river that brings joy to the city of our God, the sacred home of the Most High. God dwells in that city. It cannot be destroyed from the very break of day when armies will attack. God will protect it. The nations are in chaos, their kingdoms crumble, God's voice thunders and the earth melts. The Lord of heaven's army is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Come see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction on the world. He causes wars to end, breaks the bow, snaps the spear, burns the shields. Be still and know that I am God. I'll be honored by every nation. I'll be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. The imagery that comes from this psalm has actually become quite famous. It was most likely based on an attack of Jerusalem from the Assyrian kingdom. Most scholars think that this was King Sennacherib from Assyria, huge kingdom compared to small Israel. And Sennacherib was destroying all of the nations around him. He was conquering up Judah's cities. Most of their fortified cities fell fairly quickly up until the capital. And King Hezekiah has lost most of the nation. Over 200,000 of his people have been conquered or deported or killed by this Assyrian king. And so now he's stuck in Jerusalem, and they'd lay siege. You may have seen this stuff on Discovery Channel, siege warfare. They can't get past the walls, but they try to starve them out. So tremendously huge Assyrian army has surrounded the city of Jerusalem. King is inside, and they're starving out. This story, if this was the one that this psalm is referring to, God fought on their behalf. God sent an angel to wipe out 185,000 of the Assyrians while they slept. They got up and lost their motivation to keep the siege, and so they went home. You can see the imagery that is brought here amidst siege warfare. God is our refuge, our fortress. He is our river. Jerusalem did not have a plentiful river running through it like the Syrian capital Nineveh did. There were other cities that had a lot more river, but when you're stuck in a place and you don't have a big river, you're not in a good place. The Lord is our warrior. He's our defender. He's our provision. There's a phrase in this psalm that has become very famous, and in fact, it's probably a pretty popular Bible verse. You might have told yourself this: "Be still and know that I am God." Sometimes we use that to bring comfort to ourselves, and I've done it. I think it's a great verse to memorize and just let it soak into your heart as well. In the context, God is speaking, but he's not speaking to believers. He's not speaking to Judah. And he's not telling you to quiet yourself down. When it says right before that verse that he brings peace, he does not bring peace by negotiation or treaty. He brings peace by defeating all of the enemies. And then he says not to the believers, not to the city of Jerusalem, but he says to his enemies, to all the people around him who are warring against him, "Be still, enough, stop. Stop your warring, stop your chaos. I'm in charge. Know that I am God." That's a comforting thought, isn't it? It's like Jesus in the boat with his disciples. He doesn't get up in the middle of the storm and everybody's thinking they're going to die, and he doesn't say to his disciples, "Be still, peace." He's not talking to the disciples. He's talking to the waves and the wind. He says, "Enough, peace, be still." He can do that at any time he wants to all the chaos in our lives. In my old house, we used to have a tornado shelter in the garage. It was built by the previous owner whose wife was terrified of tornadoes in Indiana because she wasn't from around here. And so no basement in the house, but you go into the garage and a good third of the garage is taken up by this homemade tornado shelter. And it was very dense. It was a well-done shelter. Strong door. Everything's 2x4s, about 2 inches apart. So this thing is almost indestructible. Stakes, rods go way, way down to the foundation. And so we'd go in there, we'd store stuff in there. We didn't ever have to use it for real life. But it was just a little nice knowing there's this just indestructible tornado box right out in the garage if we ever needed it. A few years ago, Jackie Taylor had family over to her house. She lives in the Dallas area. But they weren't coming over for dinner. They were coming over because the weather was getting severe, and everybody in the area knew that when tornado weather was coming, she was the safe place. So her kids, her grandkids, they were all rushing off, trying to get there from work, getting through traffic, getting the baby from the daycare, and they were all converging on her house because she had the tornado shelter. Some of them got stuck in traffic, and it was a little concerning whether they'd make it in time or whether they'd make it there safely. But before the tornado hit, everybody in the family gathered in Jackie's house. They ran into the tornado shelter. They locked the door. They had provisions in the shelter, and they waited out the storm. Kids were scared. They could hear the rumbling. They could hear the door clattering. They could hear houses around them being destroyed, but they were safe in the shelter. Many of us have our family, our relatives, maybe our spouse, as our primary shelter. The home will protect you from most things. And the family that God gave you is an incredibly good gift. But there's another shelter that we have to individually have inside of that family, inside of that home, that if we do not have it, we are very, very vulnerable. And that is God himself. Did you notice the imagery? The Lord is our refuge. He is the shelter in the time of storms, because there are some storms that will come and tear down the house of your family. The thing that we feel is an indestructibly close-knit group. Our security, if our security is there, sometimes we will find ourselves exposed. This psalm was actually made most famous by Martin Luther, the 15th century reformer. Has anybody ever heard of Martin Luther? Not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther, he was a German monk. And he wrote a song, one of the most famous hymns of all time, called A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. He wrote it based on this psalm, A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. And at the end of that song, which, by the way, this song has shown up in different forms all over pop culture. It was on The Simpsons show. It showed up in Gilmore Girls. It has a kind of a revamped theme in Dungeons and Dragons. This song has been made really popular. But the essence of the song is, in Luther's life, when he was going through all kinds of imprisonment and being accused of being a heretic, and when he had to flee for his life and go into hiding, his rock, his fortress, his refuge was in God. And the last line says, let goods and kindred go. This mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. Let kindred go. We have to come to a point where we say, there is something more close to home. There is a shelter in which my soul can find peace, even if my family is being torn apart. No matter what happens around me. And it might be devastating. It might be quite painful, with quite a lot of loss. There is a shelter in a relationship with God that can endure it. So the first ingredient, through navigating life's transitions, these family dynamics that are so impactful, is a storm shelter. It's having a relationship with God that we can run to for security above anything else. The second psalm that we're going to look at is the psalm right before Psalm 46. Do you know which one that is? Yeah, Psalm 45. This is a sharp group. I know you need more of a challenge than that. This psalm is also, Psalm 46 is about a terrible transition when you're in war and chaos seems to be surrounding you and everything is going wrong and you're trapped and God is with you and he's the resource inside of the refuge that he is for you. This is a different transition, but this is actually a really joyful celebration. Psalm 45 is of a different group. Psalm 45 is a royal wedding song. So this is about a wedding between a prince and a princess, and she's a foreign princess. So you can kind of think Disney theme music in the background. This prince is getting married, and most of the psalm at the beginning is about him, and some of it toward the end is a little bit of advice to his new soon-to-be bride, and then there's just some celebration about the whole thing. I want to tell you before I read it so you can hear it a little differently, the custom of the engagement and the bridal procession of the time. So when a husband and wife, before they got married, when they got engaged, that was a much stronger contract than what engagement means to us. It was not lightly broken off. It was almost divorce level to break off an engagement. Very steep commitment. Although they would not consummate the marriage until they were married, there was a sense of contract where the husband would then prepare for the marriage, add on a room to the house or build a house, and the bride would prepare for the wedding, and there would be a family agreement. And then on the wedding day, the groom, followed by all of the groomsmen, would march through the city or process through the town and go pick up the bride at her house, and she would be ready in her best clothes and flowers in her hair and just cleaned up as best that she could be that day. And then he would take her from the house, and then they would process back together with all of the bridal party to his house. And so there's that procession to get her, and then the procession to go back together, and then they would live in their house, and then they would have a feast for a week or two. Can you imagine a week or two long feast? That would be phenomenal. That'd be great. And then there's no honeymoon, like they didn't go off to Paris for their time. They just had everyone together to celebrate, if they could afford it, for up to a couple weeks. So that procession is part of what we see in Psalm 45. I want you to hear it, and then I want to pull out one key ingredient from Psalm 45. Psalm 45, for the choir director, a love song to be sung to the tune Lilies, a psalm of the descendants of Korah, verse 1. Beautiful words stir my heart. I will recite a lovely poem about the king. For my tongue is like the pen of a skillful poet. You are the most handsome of all. Gracious words stream from your lips. God himself has blessed you forever. Put on your sword, O mighty warrior, groom. You are glorious, so majestic. In your majesty, ride out to victory, defending truth, humility, and justice. Go forth to perform awe-inspiring deeds. Your arrows are sharp, piercing your enemy's heart. The nations fall before your feet. Your throne, O God, endures forever. You rule with a scepter of justice. Skipping to verse 10. Now it changes toward her. Listen to me, O royal daughter. Take heart to what I say. Forget your people and your family far away, for your royal husband delights in your beauty. Honor him, for he is your Lord. The princess of Tyre will shower you with gifts. The wealthy will beg your favor. The bride, a princess, looks glorious in her golden gown. In her beautiful robe she is led to the king, accompanied by her bridesmaids. What a joyful and enthusiastic procession as they enter the king's palace. Your sons will become like their fathers. You will make them rulers over many lands. I will bring honor to your name in every generation. Now this is a beautiful song, and it was no doubt sung at least at that wedding. But as you read through it and you read some of the language and then you look back through the New Testament view, this is clearly not just a psalm about a king and his new bride. This is a psalm that talks about a much bigger story, an overarching consummated history here. This theme has been used in other places. It's almost clear through the New Testament. This is talking about what happens with Christ and his church, his bride. John 1 talks about Jesus coming from the Father, full of grace and truth, coming down from heaven. John 14, he uses the analogy of this with his church. Jesus says, I'm going away to prepare a place for you. I've come. Those who believe in me, we're engaged. You've got my spirit as the ring, the deposit's made. We're going to be married. I'm going to go back to heaven and prepare a place for you. Then I'm going to come and get you, and you're going to be with me forever. This is the wedding. We are in the engagement stage of it, and it has not fully happened yet. So as we look at this psalm, this is really about Christ and the church. And now I want you to catch that little bit of advice given to the bride. Forget your home. Let go of your past. Step away from your family. Follow your king. The reason this is so important for us is because you have a family. Everybody that's related to you, they have a higher calling and a higher purpose than just to be a good part of your family. And so do you. This wedding story, this metaphor, catches up the destiny of their lives. Jesus has made them primarily for himself, to be made a part of his church, and that church he is coming back for, and he is taking them from the world that we know and the family that we know and bringing them into a new day, a new marriage. Some of us, when we get to moments of transition, miss the higher purpose for our family's life. I enjoy doing weddings, and it's such an emotional time. It's such a poignant moment that is a once-in-a-lifetime, that event with those people in the room. Nothing like that will ever happen just that same way again, and there comes a point in the service that particularly pierces my heart every time. It's during the wedding when the bride walks down the aisle, in most services, escorted by dad. And the groom is waiting by himself and watching this procession. Sometimes that walk goes so quickly, but it seems like it endures forever. Some of you dads are starting to tear up because you remember it. And then they stop right there, and I say, who gives this woman to be married to this man? And the dad says, what? And then he takes the hand of his precious baby and puts it in this other hand of this other guy and goes to sit down. Candace Hammonds was engaged to be married to Tom Burkett last year. They were going to get married in October in Georgia, but they got some really bad news from their family doctor. They said Candace's dad was going to die. He only had a few days to live. And this was in August, a couple months before the wedding. So they scrambled. They knew how important it was for their dad to be able to give away his daughter. And all the wedding planners and the hospital staff even helped. And they threw together a wedding in 24 hours. And they had it in the hospital room. And her dad was on breathing support, and he was there, and he was just struggling to, just make it through the day. But when it came to this special day, he got to give away his daughter to her husband. And then a couple days later, he died. Most people at that moment, most dads realize what an incredible honor it is to give away their daughters. Even though it hurts. Most dads would never say, could you imagine Steve Hammonds, the dad, saying, no, postpone the wedding. I want her all to myself all the days of my life. That's not honorable. It's an honor, it's a gift, it's a privilege, it's part of his role to give away his daughter to a good man, to see that transition through to the end. And this is what we miss. Our family members are all destined and created to be with Jesus Christ. This is the wedding that we get to help escort. We get to walk with them and escort them to Jesus Christ and help them understand their true destiny as a family is wrapped around him, not us. This is hard. This calls us to a different way of defining family. It doesn't mean we let them go and forget about them and disown them. It means that once we let them go to him, once we entrust them into his care, we can love them rightly. Friends, some of us have approached the first day of school with fear because we're letting our kids go too far. We've approached weddings or losses or funerals or separation or residential facilities, and we do what we know is not our highest calling, but we want to keep them, we want to hold them, we want to say, who gives this? I do not give this person away. They're mine. And Jesus is saying, they're mine. You can trust. You just put them in my hands. I can take care of them. And until we put them in his hands, we're not loving them freely anyway. Friends, some of us here this morning, you're not in a season of transition, and so this may not relate to you well, which is okay. Some didn't relate to parenting a couple weeks ago or to marriage a few weeks ago. That's fine. But there are some here who your safety net is drastically missing the right refuge. Because if there were certain storms that hit your life, you would be absolutely vulnerable. You would flee. You would try to jump away and get to safety, but you do not have the assurance of a refuge in God. You're not even sure where that relationship is, much less be able to run to him and be grounded amidst the storm. I just want to give you a chance to build one this morning. Melanie Duvalier, Tornado Alley, Moore, Oklahoma. Last year in the summer, she bought a tornado shelter, had it installed. 3 hours later, a tornado hit her town. So she's running into this brand new shelter for life. Save her life as houses are getting torn up around her. You don't know how much time. We don't know what kind of transitions await us. But we know we can have a refuge, a shelter, no matter what happens. If that's you and you just really resonate with what I'm saying, I just want to pray with you and lead you in a prayer. Would you join me? Jesus, you're our shelter in the storm. Somehow life has a way of tearing down all the stuff that does not endure. And it's very frustrating to us because we work really hard at building security in other things. But Jesus, we're meant to have our security in you. So if there's anyone in the room today who knows that if the right storm would hit, they would be destroyed, I just pray that they would call to you and that they would say, Jesus, I need you. I need your strength. I need your peace. I need to trust you. I need to be able to run to you. If that's you this morning, just ask him that. Ask him that he would give you his grace and that he would establish a refuge around you, give you his peace. It doesn't mean things may calm down right away, but it means you've got a place to run where you can be secure. There are some here this morning who maybe you know Psalm 45, you know part of your role is to love them and is also to escort them to Jesus, but when it comes down to the moment, it's hard to let them go. It's hard to trust. If you would like to just have your own moment of saying, her mother and I right now to Jesus, I'm gonna just trust you with my family member. I'd like to lead you in that prayer. In your mind, in your heart, you can just say something similar to what I'm saying. Jesus, you are that warrior groom. You have defeated your enemies. You have defeated anything that could stand against us. And you have called your church, your bride, to yourself. You are able to do much more in caring for your family than I am. So I just take my family member whom I've been clinging to, and I've been too afraid to put in your hands, and I just put them in your hands. And when you say, who gives this person away? I know the one I'm giving them to. I'm entrusting them to you. And I'll just go have a seat and watch what you do. Amen. As you navigate life's transitions, don't forget these two ingredients. It's hard to say how one could make it without them. If we had time, some of your stories, you could stand up and tell them. You could stand up and talk about your storm shelters in the worst of times and how God has given you peace. You could talk about how when you trusted Jesus with your family members, even if they were wandering off the wrong direction, there was a sense of peace in his control. Would you stand with me as we get ready to close? I need to ask a favor of you. In the recent weeks, some of you have made key decisions with your relationship with Jesus. A few weeks ago in marriage, there were quite a few who have just raised their hand and said, yeah, I want to ask God's grace into my life. And some of you have made key turning points in surrendering your life to Jesus. The favor I want to ask is I would like you to consider being baptized. Or maybe you've already been baptized, but you've made a really turning point rededication. I'd like you to consider rededicating yourself to Jesus and doing that in public. The baptism ritual kind of says to the world, all right, here's what Jesus did in my life. I'm with him. If you're interested in doing that, June 4th is the time we'll do it. We have lots of openings. You can put your name on a card or a communication card before you leave. Pass it to one of the ushers or drop it off at the hub, and we'll let you know about all the details. I'd love to help you get connected. But I just want to ask you, if you've made those internal decisions, let's make it public so that other people can celebrate with you. Next week, if you join us, we'll talk about a topic in the church that we love to hate, and yet it will be very impactful for our families. If we have not met, I'll be up here after the service. I would love to just say hi, come and introduce yourself. Or if you have a special prayer request, I'd love to pray for you as well. And now may the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you as you go. You are sent.